Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So I'm finally ready to showcase my Paladin Tank build for Module 26. This build will incorporate all the latest endgame gear, but I shall go over alternatives that you can use when you're still building up your character. Even when you're just a fresh level 20, what you can work towards obtaining and what some of it even obtain immediately. So as a Paladin tank, your objective is to hold the threat and tank all the damage. So in this video, we're going to cover a build that will be very suitable for all content other than potentially changing out one or two pieces for some specific content. We'll get there in the gear section. There'll be timestamps on the video play bar below where you can skip to any section you're most interested in. So to start things off, just a quick showcase. This build's objective is to get as much defensive stats as possible along with team support, like the Illustra's Grace Ring, companion enhancement to increase the party's damage, an aura, combat power, an artifact, and some other small buffs. Now with a variant of this build, you can get all your defensive stats to 90%. You sacrifice one thing of team support, which is that Grace Ring. But if somebody's already using the Grace Ring, then you could very well run this build and get maximum amount of survivability with these defensive stats. However, it will depend on the fight whether you actually want to use that build, as its reliability can depend on the content you're running. But I'll showcase in particular that setup and what changes you'll need to make to my usual build in order to get those sweet 90s. So we'll start things off with our mechanics as a paladin. Well, you have this shift ability, which is our block. I guess it'll vary if you're on consoles. But when the enemy goes to attack you, you can press that key in order to block the damage, and it will drain your guard instead of your actual hit points. During that block, you're also immune to crowd control effects that can be very useful, and you will need to make sure to take advantage of that, specifically for some mechanics. Then we have the tab ability, and this you can activate by pressing that key and you enter this state. However, it will change a little bit if you have intimidating presence, which I do not recommend. You look like an angel, which is pretty cool, but it's pretty useless. And while you're in this stance, your divinity will drain over time. You have a divinity pool, which you will use to cast some powers. You can see the costs of them, and you have a total of 1,000. And while within this tab effect, Divine Champion, it will drain over time. So you cannot be in it for so long. And if you enter it, and then leave it, you have a 5-second cooldown. Beware of that. So you want to activate it when you really need it. And the benefits of it is that it absorbs half the amount of damage off your guard automatically from your stamina. That can be really useful, and on top of that, you also have that control immunity. So you'll use this when you still want to attack, but you also want to absorb the damage of the hits. If you're taking a lot of damage, you can use that benefit like that. But additionally, you can use block while within that to activate Divine Palisade. So during this tab ability, I go to block, I create this. I cannot move, I am rooted, but the benefits I gain is I create a cone, and everything in that cone takes 10% less damage and gets a bit of a heal. Additionally, you're immune to most control effects. So you will use this ability when you're going to set up for taking a massive hit, and also when you want to protect your allies behind it in the cone if they're all going to take like a big damage soak. So then we go to our powers. This is the general setup I use in a boss fight. We've got Oath Strike, which is just what we use to attack our enemy during downtime when we're not casting encounters, not blocking an attack. I generally have Radiant Slam as my secondary, just as a gap closer. Personally, I'm uncomfortable without playing with it because I've always played with it. But you could very well have Shielding Strike as your secondary and use that when you need an extra burst of stamina restoration. For our encounter powers, our primary threat ability is Templar's Wrath. That gives you the best potential for initial burst with threat. Then you will use some more Templar's Wrath throughout the fight, using Vow if you die or if you lose the threat, to get it back to place yourself on top of the threat list. And then Binding Oath for survivability. It's got some massive gains there of stamina restoration, and I just figured out earlier today, the extra damage effect from this will count as an encounter power for triggering your Master Boon Focused Retaliation. Keep in mind we have alternative encounter powers, like I generally switch from Vow to Burning Light when I'm going up against a group of enemies. I'll taunt them and then use Burning Light to stun them. Here's another example. We go up, we use Burning Light to stun them and then taunt them. It could depend on the fight whether it switches the priority to stun them or to taunt them. Generally, if they're spread out, you'll wait till they come close to you by taunting them and then stun them when they're all together. That stun can save your life in tougher content. If you want more threat than Templar's Wrath, which you really shouldn't need if you actually hit the enemies with it, you could have Sacred Weapon instead of like Binding Oath. And keep in mind, if you're in a particularly challenging fight where you're going to take a lot of damage, you might want to have Absolution there. Depending on the fight, it can be very useful. I recommend checking out gameplay videos of particular content that you want to run. If you want to run the new Demon Web Pits, I just posted a gameplay video yesterday. You can watch that. It was a relatively smooth run. And then there's other gameplay videos of Temple of the Spider. I'll probably post a more updated one. And then Examinate's Reliquary, I also want to make a guide for that. And keep in mind, Smite plus its Divine Challenger feature also has a benefit. Like, you will see me using it in the last boss of Demon Web Pits. It's a taunt placed on top of the threat list. Instead of using Templar's Wrath later on in the fight, it can be better to switch to that, so you can reserve Divinity for survivability. But we move to our daily powers. Divine Judgment you're using in the start of a boss fight during that peak time of the artifact call to get a massive amount of damage combined with a Manticore Bite bonus like we could get from this helmet. Otherwise, you're either using Shield of Faith or Divine Protector. If you're running challenging content where you're going to have to tank a big hit, I recommend having Divine Protector plus Shield of the Gods. If you're running easier content and the healer's not that great, potentially have Shield of Faith plus Sheltering Light to support them. So then we go to our class features, and we generally use Composure and Aura of Wrath. You can only have one aura, which is unfortunate, but we go with Aura of Wrath to boost our team's critical strike. Alternatively, you could use the one for Deflect, or you could use the one for Aura of Vengeance. When people take damage, you'll deal damage back. It's generally actually better than the threat Aura of Valor. Feats, we just go with all of these. If you're making some sort of damage hybrid build, you could use Bane in AoE plus Baneful Strikes. And again, these fourth set of feats here, Shield of the Gods for your own protection with Divine Protector, and Sheltering Light for helping the healer heal your teammates with Shield of Faith. Depend on what content you're running, on which one you want to be using. The newest dungeon, you probably just want to go with Shield of the Gods. So again, our rotation to hold aggro at the beginning of the fight is usually to start things off with an artifact call, our artifact mount, then you use our Dragonfire here, then we use the Templar's Wrath, another Templar's Wrath, our mount power, and another Templar's Wrath, and then use Binding Oath if you're low on stamina, and just get swinging that at will. But what you want to do is hold down the at will button and then spam click your shield. That way you are animation cancelling that at will attack, and thus you end up gaining a lot more action points and attack a lot faster. From there, keep using more Templar's Wraths if the DPS are close to like orange on the top left. If they're not, then save the Templar's Wraths and keep your Divinity and only use it then when you need it. Blocking attacks when needed as per the content, restoring that guard with Binding Oath, and taking the threat back with Vow if you need. And otherwise, switching to different powers depending on the content, like I mentioned before, Smite, later on in a fight where you really need to be using Divinity for survivability, potentially Absolution if you need to tank a big hit that you're on the verge of not surviving. Just make sure you are aware of the allies' threat bubbles. You see them on the top left there. Again, I'm currently red. I have the threat. You can see Stoff is approaching to take it. Like Stoff becomes orange here. And you'll see I'll use a smite right after. He's orange, I smite, and there we go, we get the hold on the thread again. So now we move to our stats. As a tank, you want to focus on defense, then awareness, and then critical avoidance. From there, you don't really need to focus deflect or deflect severity. You can, but definitely don't prioritize them over the first 3 stats. From there, it's just hit points. However, keep in mind, don't miss out on damage resistance sources like the Lich or your Overload, Resiliency of the Depths, or a specific one against certain enemy types. So we move to our gear and what alternatives you can use to what I have. We start with the headpiece and we've got the Rugged Helmet. This is from Dragon Hunts. You use it for the Manticore main bite. An alternative is the main of the Manticore from Chult, much lower item level though, or you can get Manticore's bite on a ring instead and then switch to whatever helmet you have available to you. Make sure to look up the Tanner's ring. You don't need the legendary version, you can get the epic one. And so if you have that bonus on a ring, this one or even the newest diamond one, switch your headpiece to, like, ideally the Exalted Maiden's one. It comes from the North Dark Reaches, where you have to do Master Temple of the Spider. However, if you're running AoE fights, when you're going up against groups of enemies, you can totally use the Turban of Shifting Sands. It comes from Hardcore Vault of Stars mini-bosses. For the armor, we have the new Abyss Conquerors one. Alternative to this is from Dragon Hunts, the Rugged Mail. And before that is like the Dragon Steel ones for the Seals of the Dragon. The arms, we have these also new Abyss Conqueror ones from the Master Demon Web Pits. An alternative to these is the Crag Scalers from Hardcore Vault of Stars. And alternative to that, the rugged ones here, and before that, just the ones with seals. But these will be the ones you want to aim for. A quick note on those is they will reduce your movement speed, but as long as you attack and then block, you will remove that movement speed debuff. So make sure when attacking with these and getting the bonuses up here that you go ahead and block before you want to run off. That way you aren't really slowed down. For our weapons, we have the new Durgar Mercenary ones, but they have the same bonus as the Feywood ones, and the same bonus again as the Mastered ones. You will generally just get them from the auction house. Just look whichever's cheaper, but these will be the best to support your team. For the boots, we've got the rugged ones, again from Dragon Hunts. An alternative is the Wisps of the Shadow Demon, and if you don't have those, still working on your Dragon Hunts, just use the Dragon Steel ones for the seals. For our neck, waist and artifact set here, we have the Mythic Tiamat set. And overall it's the most reliable, but it can come at quite a cost. You have to complete Master Tiamat to get it. An alternative, a very nice budget one, is the Valhalla set. You get the cloak there, you get the belt, and you get the Horn of Valhalla. It creates a set where you will reduce the enemy's damage up to a maximum of 5%. If you really need more item level, you could take the Tentacle Rod set just there, both of which you can just get on the auction house. One coming from Assault on Svargborg Trial, the other Master Temple of the Spider. And otherwise, from Dragon Hunts, there is the Dragon Scale set, which I will use in order to get our 90% stats towards the end of the video. And it can be very good, but situational and it requires a certain playstyle. Again, we'll talk about that later. But for our rings, we have the Grace Ring to help our team. And then we have the Topaz Ring. And we generally don't need to use our daily power other than the beginning of the fight. And then when you're going to take a big hit. So in Demon Web Pits, that's whenever you're going to take a Tank Buster, the Ball in the second boss, and the Hypo in the last boss. And you should be able to get your daily power for using the animation cancelling within about 20 seconds. And so then you'll have a good amount of time with your daily power full, gaining all these bonuses. And for AoE, we don't really use any daily power, so we have the massive boost in stats for that. Now, alternative to these rings, if you don't need the Grace Ring to boost your team, I would take the Ring of Darkness. It will reduce the enemy's stats by 30%, effectively giving you 30% deflect severity over the cap. Coming from Hardcore Vault of Stars though. And yes, the Grace Ring from Master Temple of the Spider, or in the pack completing the Demon Web Pits campaign, and the Topaz Ring from Master Demon Web Pits dungeon. Otherwise, I would take the Diamond Abyssal Loop Ring from your Master Demon Web Pits. Has the Manticore Bite, and then you'd switch your helmet over to the Enchanted Maiden's Restoration one for the Divinity regen. But again, make sure somebody has Grace in the party, and if it's not your team, then use it. And if you're running AoE content with lots of ads, you could very well switch the Topaz Ring over to one of these Charging Bull rings, either the new Masterwork one or the Celerity one from Dragon Hunts. But I generally just go with the Topaz and Grace. Again, if somebody's already running Grace, then feel free to switch over to Celerity or the Dark Lake Ward ring. They give the benefit where when you run around and after 1 second you gain a bonus where you will pulse threat around you. And otherwise, keep in mind that instead of the Topaz ring, you'd be better off taking a damage resistant specific ring if you're running certain content. Like Xemna's Reliquary, you want the Lothian Pain one. And make sure if you do not have a Manticore's Bite, like you're still working to get the rugged helmet, then use the Tanner's Ring. You don't have to get the legendary version, you can get the epic version. Just look up Tanner on the auction house. As well, you can run the Ring of Condemned for AoE threat, and you can run the Ring of Overwhelmed for AoE damage resistance, or even in a boss fight, if you move a little, you gain the damage resistance. Some good rings here to use in combination, and you can get those from the auction house, so that's something a new player could pick up. You can run the epic versions, not a big deal. We go to the shirt, and here we take the Loth Embrace one. Make sure to switch to the damage resistance against drowned spiders if you're running that specific content, and otherwise you could have the Dragon Hunt ones, but you can buy these off the auction house and you can farm heroics in the new zone to obtain it. And the trousers, we just got these again from the new heroics in the new zone, or you could buy them from the auction house. So now we go to modifications. That's our armor kits and jewels. We just got critical avoidance in all of the armor here. Then for the jewels, we got the awareness in our neck, waist, and rings. Then we go to our enchantments. What matters is our defense. 3 jades and a cobalt. A garnet in utility, fortified nature, recharge speed. If you need the movement speed, I'd have that on hand, especially if you're running dungeons, want to move a bit faster between ad groups. And overloads, again, ideally you want the resiliency, but if you're running specific content, you want like a demon ward or a dragon ward or a spider ward or even a drow ward, just to reduce the damage of those specific enemy types. Know your enemy and which one you should be using, but you can just ignore overloads altogether if the content's easy. And otherwise, an unholy protection for the stats. Alternative to that is like the Underdark Lurker. And if you really want to just get tons of stats, you can run the Underdark Lurker instead of Resiliency of the Depths. Then for our artifacts here, we're running with mainly stamina regen bonus ones. We've got the Wheel of Elements, the Champion's Banner, the Mythallar Fragment. They all give us a secondary effect of stamina regen, which is really nice. And then of course we have the Arcane Globe to complete our set. Keep in mind you want to use an artifact to boost the team's damage. So if somebody's already running the Mythallar Fragment, then use like Halaster, Blades, etc. So we move to our race and ability scores. I personally use Azamar as it's got a decent bonus for healer and tank. But you could very well run with Dwarf, Drow, Renegade Drow, Dragonborn, Halfling, Human. All of those are decent options, and it's not going to be the end of the world which one you choose from those. For your ability scores, focus on Constitution and Charisma. Then we go to our companions. Here we have an active companion that supports the team. We can use Portobello, Tutor, Drizzt, Spine Devil, Black Death Scorpion. But that's the list right here of which ones you'd use. You ideally have one of the top 5 to support your team. For our companion equipment, we're using the critical avoidance and incoming healing ones. You get them from doing the Master Crown of Keldagon, but you'll also get one from the pack by completing the Scaleblight Summon, which you can do on multiple characters, transferring the pack to the one character you want the gear on. Alternatively is you do the North Dark Reaches campaign and get some gear here with some defensive stats for yourself. Like you could take the incoming healing one here or the defensive and awareness one here. We're going with a debuff companion enhancement that increases our party's damage. So we've got armor break there, but these are like the top 4 you want to do to increase your party's damage. And for damage resistance, you want like weapon break, or even better is advantage nullification. For our companions here, we've got the tamed velociraptor that just increases our team's power and our own. Generally in endgame, everybody uses this. And then we have the feral velociraptor. Now this is really exclusive. You may not have it, but when anybody is running a raptor, whether that's a tamed or a feral, you'll give them that 3.8% awareness, along with yourself, of course. But don't be discouraged. There are a lot of other companion bonuses you can use. One of them that I didn't actually put on this list that can be pretty useful for the current endgame content is actually this phase spider. And this one comes from the adventure Roth Valley. You'll obtain Little White here with that bonus which doubles in Underdark. And we've got it here in one of our slots. But if we want some more redundancy, more awareness, I'd go with the Golden Deep Crow here. But we don't exactly need that, so we've got this. We got the Lich for the damage resistance, the Myconid, and the Little White. Just again, you do not have to go with the exact ones I have, as they can be pretty expensive because everybody wants what I use. But there are a lot of options here you can use instead. You can't go too wrong. But let's move to our mounts. In our current tab here, we've got a combat power which is going to boost the party's damage during an artifact call. The other alternatives are the ones here, but in a dungeon you want to have the Eclipse Lion or Swarm. Those are both the best, but decent alternative is the King of Spines or the Pegasus. Then for our crit bonus, we've got Pack Tactics and Aura that gives this bonus to your entire team as well. But otherwise you want somebody on like Runic Aura, Mystic Aura. Those are the main 3 bonuses. We're using Pack Tactics here, which gives us the extra awareness. So help us out there, along with giving our team some combat advantage. And our stable, this is what we have. 2 Protector's Covenant bonuses, Cursed Resolve, Gladiator's Gall, and Tactician's Restoration. These are all new 4-slot mounts, can be very expensive. You may just want to run with 3-slot mounts until the price drops on 4-slot mounts as the time goes by. For the insignias themselves, we've got a bunch of Courage and Fortitude, and that is pretty much all we are using across the board there. Courage and Fortitude. For collars, doesn't really matter, but you want to get like encounter power damage here. And because I don't want to get a collar specifically for a tank, I'm using movement speed here. But you could have incoming healing here instead. And instead of the outgoing healing one, you could have stamina regen. And for the bottom one here, Wayfaring, you could have recharge speed or action point gain. Then we move to our boons. Here we just go with all the defensive ones. These 2 columns here. Then get the ones for the damage and damage resistance against enemy types, the movement speed. I generally get like the lingering potion ones here as well, in case I want to run rejuvenating potions instead of a stone of health. And otherwise, we've gone with stamina regen and action point gain. Instead of action point gain, you could totally take incoming healing. For our master boon, focused retaliation. Works really well with our binding oath. For example, if I use the binding oath here, then I enter combat, you can see when he attacks me, it triggers focused retaliation. And that gives us 6% deflect and 6% deflect severity, along with some control resistance, which can be not very useful in certain fights. With the stronghold, it just got the power, the awareness, and revive sickness. Then we move to our consumables, and here we are using an invocation blessing just to get this awareness. Then we've got some guild food chocolate with the awareness. You can also buy some new food in our bundling, which will also give awareness. It also gives some hit points on the side, like all of them. Then Fohammer's favor elixir for the deflect and deflect severity. Then Caprice for the deflect and hit points, and then a potion of deflect for the deflect rating. For the belt, we've got a stone of health, a clutch instant heal to full, can be really helpful. The dragonfire for threat, alternatively you could have the hawk, And then you could have the chain of scales for the extra awareness. I recommend trying to get it. You'll have to do a bunch of grinding in Shult though. So you want to see what changes you make to this build to get these 90% stats. Well, in order for this to work, you will have to be in combat. You will have to be getting attacked, and you'll trigger all the bonuses and you'll get those. Now, it is not static stats. They will expire. But what you can do to obtain them, you can switch your headpiece over to the Exalted one. You can switch your ring over to the Diamond one. Then you can switch 2 of your enchantments over to Cobalts. Then go to your companions and switch the Feral over to the Durgar for some crit avoidance. Switch the Lich, yeah, maybe not ideal, over to Regis for deflect and deflect severity. Then go back to enchantments and switch resiliency over to your Underdark Lurker. And then you want to switch your neck and waist set over to the Blue Dragon's Mark set. That will give you the ability to gain 15% deflect severity plus 7.5% awareness. Then you want to go summon your dummies here, go into combat, let them attack you. This triggers your fortified nature. You'll get your stats to like this when you have those 5 stacks. Then you can use your binding oath to trigger focused retaliation, which boosts your stats further. You got that 90% deflect, crit avoidance. And now you want to animation cancel vow, and you'll get those other stats. And there you'll end up with everything at 90 except awareness, which you then just need to attack. You will get that awareness to 90% with the gloves, and you end up with all 90s. And that is that setup to get all those stats capped. It is not really something that practical for a boss fight when they don't hit you enough to maintain fortified nature. And on top of that, it can be a lot of work to keep the dragon hunt set active. That is why I generally just go with my previously mentioned build setup with the Tiamat set, the Jade enchantments, the rugged helmet with the Grace ring, the resiliency of the depth overload or one of the other ones. The Lurker one is just freaking expensive. The Feral Raptor here for the extra team support, and then the Lich here. And that is what I usually use to get some more awareness and more redundancy. If you don't want to rely too much on the arms or fortified nature, then just use the Golden Deep Crow there instead of the Little White. And that is it for my build for Module 26. Hopefully this was somewhat insightful to you guys. Yes, it's well possible to get those stats to 90%. Not the easiest to maintain. In AoE, it'll be pretty dead easy. In single target, not so much. It will depend on the boss. Can be easier to just go with a more solid, reliable build, which has the stats a lot more stable. And so you end up with a little bit more base survivability than relying on those procs and triggers of extra stat bonuses. So a massive thank you again to all these channel members for their added support. We'll see you guys around. Bye for now.